that request? Should he have done? Also, tonight, if your boss asked you to put your pronouns on the end of your email, what would you write? I'll be speaking to one man who had the audacity to write his actual chromosomes and the fact that he's an adult human male. He got the boot, and he's got a massive legal bill to boot. What on earth is this world coming to? And speaking of the world, Donald Trump, he has been talking very tough indeed. He says he's going to boot out the radical left ideologies everywhere, from education and beyond. Will we turn a corner as a result? I certainly hope so. Do you? And look at this, what a panel I've got for you tonight. Professor Matt Goodwin and James Schneider. There's a lot to discuss, but before we get stuck in, let's cross live for tonight's 6 o'clock news headlines.
Thank you, Michelle. It's just after 6 o'clock and these are your latest headlines. In the last hour, a spokesperson for Avon and Somerset Police has given a statement following the death of a 17-year-old girl on the M5 motorway last night. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
This is a hugely distressing incident and one that will no doubt cause great shock amongst the public. Our thoughts and our sympathies are first and foremost with the girl's family. A specially trained officer has been assigned to keep providing them with updates and support, not only today but in the weeks ahead too. Due to the seriousness of the incident, a mandatory referral was made to the Independent Police Office for Police Conduct in the early hours of the morning. The IOPC has notified us they will investigate the incident independently.
Elsewhere, a spokesperson for the Prime Minister has said that Sir Keir respects the decision of the Archbishop of Canterbury to resign. They added that the PM's thoughts, first and foremost, remain with all the victims. Justin Welby stepped down earlier this afternoon following a damning report into a prolific child abuser associated with the Church of England. The report concluded that Welby had failed to act after learning about the abuse by John Smythe QC in 2013. Elsewhere in politics, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has distanced himself from the comments made by former Labour adviser John McTernan, who said Britain doesn't need small farmers. When asked about the comments at today's COP29 Q&A, Starmer said he was absolutely committed to supporting our farmers. However, this statement has been seen as controversial following the budget last month, in which Labour introduced a tax of 20% on inherited farming assets above £1 million. Earlier, a sheep and cattle farmer told GB News this new tax will devastate many family businesses.
Agrees that in a sound democracy we need to pay taxes because we understand that public sector needs supporting. But I think that the critical thing the government has completely missed on this is that there is no margin left in farming, in British farming. We're constantly told as farmers that we need high welfare livestock systems, we need high regard for the environment, and we're achieving all those things if you look at a global level. But there is still no margin to pay surplus towards taxes, particularly this sort of draconian inheritance tax, which will, frankly, finish off many family businesses.
And finally, it's been announced that Gary Lineker will step down as host of Match of the Day at the end of this current season. The 63-year-old former England striker has presented Match of the Day since 1999. But now Mark Chapman, Gabby Logan and Alex Scott are the current frontrunners to replace the former England star. Those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophie Reaper. More from me in the next hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much for that. My name's Michelle Dewberry and I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, I've got my panel. I've got Matt Goodwin, the pollster and academic, and James Schneider, the former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn. Look, I heard that last story there. Do you have any interest in Match of the Day? Who should be the next host?
I want Ian Wright to be the next host, although Alex Scott's good and apparently she's the front runner, but Ian Wright would fulfil a kind of childhood thing. I loved watching him as a kid.
Do you care?
I'm not bothered at all. I'm glad that we've got less Gary Lineker in our lives, to be honest.
You don't know you'll have less of him. You could end up having more. Be careful what you wish for.
That's a very good point, actually. Are any of you lot delighted that you might not have to face Gary Lineker when it comes to your football commentary? But as James says, perhaps you'll get him in a different medium instead. So indeed, be careful what you wish for. But look, lots we need to discuss tonight. You can get in touch with me all the usual ways. You can email me gbviews@gbnews.com. You can go on Twitter or X and get me there. Or, of course, you can go to the website, which is gbnews.com/yoursay. Lots to discuss tonight, everybody. Donald Trump, he's talking very tough indeed, isn't he? Which, if you ask me in particular, delights me. And I hope that actually the whole world starts to turn a corner as a result. But you might disagree with me at home. He's talking very tough about what he calls the radical left in places like schools. We'll come on to that before the end of the programme. And I'll also speak to one fella. When asked by his bosses to put the pronouns at the end of the email, he had the audacity to accurately describe himself as an adult human male. He got the boot and a massive legal bill as well. What do you make to that? Before we get stuck into all of that, though, of course, we discussed this last night. We was asking, will he, won't he, should he, shouldn't he? Of course, I'm speaking about the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. Well, now we know the outcome. He has indeed resigned. He says that basically he feels like a profound shame and so on and so forth. What do you think to this, James?
So I think that these things shouldn't end with just one person resigning. And, you know, generally, if there's been some kind of institutional failure, and I don't know the details, I don't know precisely what happened in the church, I don't know exactly who did what wrong, but I imagine that some people did somewhere. And if the person at the top resigning draws a line under it, then that would be the wrong thing to do. Really, what should be done for the sake of survivors and, you know, children in the future is systems are set up so this sort of thing can't happen again. So if his resignation is the start of that, great. If it's the end of that, then not so great.
Well, are you part of Welby's former flock? What do you think to all of it? I would always argue that if you feel a profound sense of shame, well, you might have acted on that when you found out the information in the first place and gone to the police, as I would imagine most normal people would have done, no? Matt Goodwin.
I think it's right that he's resigned. After all, beyond this scandal, this is somebody that has, I would argue, used his position to lecture the rest of us on how we should live our lives. And I think, you know, he should be really living in accordance with the values that he preaches. And if you read some of the stories that have come out over the last few days, I was particularly influenced by Marcus Walker's piece in The Spectator today, where he said, you know, essentially, look, if the Archbishop didn't know everything about this case, he certainly must have had a pretty good idea that something shady here was going on, given the circles and the networks that he was moving in. But look, I mean, we've got to just stamp out child abuse wherever it happens and whenever it happens.
Yeah, and you know, it always leaves a bit of a taste in the mouth, doesn't it, when someone says that they're resigning, when actually they've been forced, pressured, squeezed, essentially into doing the very right thing. It always leaves a bit of taste in my mouth, actually, because I feel a little bit like if you had the sentiment that you're saying that you do today, and it was a sincere sentiment, then surely you wouldn't have needed so much pressure in order for you to have left the building, so to speak. But what do you think to it all? Of course, so many people just horrendously affected by this man. Absolutely disgraceful. But look, get your thoughts in however way you can want to involve yourself tonight. You can email, tweet, or of course go to the website. But look, another story that I'm very keen to talk about, Nigel Farage. He has been criticising again Sir Keir Starmer, this time because Reform UK, and this is a campaign that you've been very instrumental in. I'll set that scene right at the start, Mark. This is about the amount of transparency we should have when it comes to the impact of immigration on this country. Tell us more.
Yeah, so what effectively is happening at the moment, which is why I'm outraged, really, on behalf of the British people and taxpayers, is you see people like Keir Starmer blaming voters for misinformation and disinformation while not making information available to them, specifically about how things like mass immigration are impacting our country, impacting crime rates, imprisonment rates, repeat offending, welfare claims, tax credits, housing, accommodation. Many other countries in Europe Michelle, collect this data and they make it available to taxpayers so they can see for themselves how this experiment is changing their country. Our government doesn't do that. So what happens is, under both the Conservative and the Labour governments recently, if you want to know crime rates by nationality, immigration status, country of origin, if you want welfare claims, tax credits, housing, accommodation, etc., they've got this information, but they're not sharing it with people. So actually, you know, I said publicly, we need to do something about this. The 5 Reform MPs sent a letter to Keir Starmer, and I think what is especially outrageous, Michelle, especially outrageous, is he hasn't even bothered to reply to their letter saying, why is this information not being shared with the British people? I think it's outrageous.
I'll come to you in a sec. But what I also want to flag, and what I think is so bizarre, I feel like sometimes I'm just living in some kind of odd parallel universe, because you've got people like Robert Jenrick speaking out about this. You've got the MP Nick Timothy, a man that I quite like and respect, actually. Robert Jenrick saying, why can't we have a sensible... Sorry, we can't have a sensible conversation about migration if government keeps deleting the data, whether it's on welfare or crime. The institutional cover-up of the impacts of immigration is a scandal. But I just look at that and I go, but what are you talking about? Because you guys were in government for 14 years, and I don't actually remember this information being widely and freely published. Anyway, what do you think to it all?
So I think if the government is gathering data on any issue, then that should be available to the public. There's lots of pieces of information about migration I'd like to see, including a number of things to do with the benefits, including the skills that are brought here, the new businesses that are started, the positive impact on public services through staffing and so on. And I think if you wanted to have a sort of grown-up conversation about migration, which we're constantly told by figures on the right, by people like Matt, that they want to have, then you would be including those sorts of things in your campaign.
So, just to be clear, asking for transparency, asking for information, asking that British taxpayers get data that is affecting the world around them, affecting their country, that's not a grown-up request.
No, as I said, Matt, I'm all for data that the state collects to be made publicly available in whatever the right way that is, so that researchers can look at it, so that taxpayers can look at it. But, of course, this request is a political request, of course. We understand that. It's not come from you as a researcher writing a letter to the Home Secretary. It's been tweeted by a leader of a political party to the Prime Minister and followed up in the same way.
Actually, there are lots of academics who would like to have this data.
No doubt there are, and there are lots of academics who'd like to have other types of data as well. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't have it, including, as I'm saying, the various benefits that we receive through migration and through immigrants coming to our country. The point I'm trying to make is, and the reason why we're talking about it, and whether it's a scandal or not that an opposition MP's tweeted letters of the Prime Minister's been responded to or not. And, you know, I used to tweet those letters from the Leader of the Opposition to the Prime Minister. And you know what you're doing when you're doing that. You're making part of a political
representing
campaign.
the British people.
You're making a part of a political campaign in order to make a point. And now...
Asking for transparency.
Well, you're asking for transparency, and I'm certainly not supporting the government, and I'm saying transparency is good. But the transparency I'd like to see would take things fully in the round, including benefits, and then we could begin to have, you want to have so you say, a grown-up conversation about it. Let's do so. Let's do so without trying to cherry-pick, without trying to sort out, present things in the most alarming way possible. Yeah. And then we could hopefully get somewhere. I'm 37 years old. For basically all of my life I can remember, there have been people like yourself and like many others who come from the political right, who have large platforms, who have spent, I can remember it my entire life, saying we can't have a conversation about migration. Yet we seem to be having one all of the time.
Well, you're turning it into a slightly different point. What riles people today, James, and I think you accept this does happen, we now have a censorship industrial complex that basically says to people, if you question mass immigration, if you question the effects of migration on Western societies, you are misinformed, you're disinformed. We need BBC Verify to come along and say, hey, you got it wrong. But actually, what's right is you cannot say to people, you should respect the expert class, you should trust the expert class, while that class doesn't share information with British people. Because I bet you what we're going to find when this information comes out, maybe you're right and I'm wrong. Maybe we'll find, hey, immigration is reducing crime. Maybe immigration is driving the economy to new heights. Maybe it's just all hidden away and actually immigration is the best thing in the world. But actually what we're going to find, I bet, is what we see in Denmark, what we see in France, what we see in Germany, what we see in the Netherlands, which is mass immigration is a net fiscal cost. It's not a benefit. It's not actually helping us. It's not driving prosperity. And as someone on the left, James, I think you're on the left, although you had a very different background from many people on the left. You, I think, of all people, would understand that the working class in this country deserve to be in an economy that works for ordinary working people.
Absolutely. Of course, of course. And that is why I'm opposed to the anti-migrant politics, for that very reason, because I think that yourself and Nigel Farage and Tommy Robinson and so on...
What's Tommy Robinson got to do with this debate? You see what's happening here?
The way in which you focus the attention, as if it is the source of all of our country's ills on migration, distracts from the main things which are driving stagnant wages, crumbling public services, crap in our water, multinationals not paying taxes, and all the other things which are really the fundamental cause of the fact that, yeah, we don't live in an economy that works for most ordinary people. And I'm afraid that the types of policies that the people on your side of the debate support on all of the economic and social issues drive that inequality and drive that insecurity.
You do understand big business is using cheap migrant labour to undermine the working class in Western economies. You do understand that.
So let's have a conversation about that in a serious way.
Well, hang on then, let's have that serious
Yes, no, I'd love to. I'd love to.
We're going to after the break, everyone. Let me just tell you before I go to the break, if you're not familiar with the request that Reform have put in, just to tell you some of the things that they're asking, they want transparency on the following types of data. So it'll be stuff like the amount of income tax, national insurance, tax credits and child benefit by nationality and immigration status. They want data on arrest rates, prisoner status by nationality and immigration, welfare claims, and data on spending programmes such as the refugee integration loan scheme and so on and so forth. They want full breakdowns of cost per night of hotel accommodation. So you can ponder that over the break and tell me whether or not you think that should be made available to us. If so, do you think anything else should be added or not? We'll continue this conversation in 2.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight, every night from 11 p.m.
The Daily Mail now, Josh, and pub landlords have to worry about more than the optics when it comes to offensive banter,
Yeah,
it
this
seems.
is a really big story and important. Pub landlords could have to become banter cops to stop themselves being sued by staff offended by comments from customers under workers' rights reform. So, Labour, when they were part of their election process, they were like, we're going to reform workers' rights, and that all sounds good on paper, but there were issues in terms of how might it affect employees and fear from employees costing them more money. One of these things that they're sort of pushing through, though, is that in the Equality Act of 2010, part of the issue was that if you were offended at work or someone said something sexist or racist, something that affected you, the employer had to take some sort of, they had three chances to kind of take action.
Yeah.
Now, the employer should have taken action already. So employees can sue employers. Now, this has a big impact on us because we're comics and we perform in venues. And if some of the bar staff hear a joke that they don't like, then they can sue their employer, potentially, under this legislation.
So it's not punters?
Well, also, it could be like you're at a bar and some bloke is like, oh, I like that top, Berlin, or whatever. That's not good behaviour. But the point is now that employee could sue their employer.
So, because, I mean, the sort of scenario I was imagining was that a barmaid was being maybe sexually harassed or
That's
something.
what they're focusing in this article, but other articles have gone down the free speech route.
OK.
And also venues and universities having lectures. We saw it at, in Edinburgh Fringe Festival and Sadowitz. He had a show cancelled not because of any punters, but because two of the 18-year-olds were working. They were upset by his
There was
wedding.
a bar in Brighton, wasn't there? There was a story we covered a few weeks ago. A bar in Brighton threw some people out because...
exactly. They had turfs on the...
Turfs.
Yeah.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome back. Michelle Dewberry with you till 7. Mike Goodwin and James Schneider remain alongside me. So many of you getting in touch on that fair story about Justin Welby. There's not a lot of love lost for him. I'm putting this politely, I have to say. And the sentiment is from so many of you that he shouldn't have essentially been allowed to just freely resign. Many of you wanted to see him essentially fired. Lots of you feel very upset. Many of you have been getting in touch saying that you are a churchgoer and you find this a very sad day, but also an optimistic day for what the future might hold. Keep your thoughts on that one coming in. But look, we've just been discussing data and how much transparency there should be when it comes to the impacts of immigration on the UK. I've got a divided panel here to some extent. I've got a lot of support coming from the email from you guys at home saying that you want and you welcome this transparency. Let's just continue this conversation then if we can. James is suggesting that your data set should be expanded to include potential positive impacts as well.
I completely agree. Let's just get everything on the table. Now, the reason...
But then why didn't you add it to your request then?
Well, a lot of that data could show that there's a positive effect of immigration. If you collect tax data, if you collect welfare data, maybe it will show that immigrants are less dependent on the welfare state than, you know, Brits, or maybe it will show that they're not taking a big amount of money out of the economy relative to their contribution. These are things that are missing. The reason we're asking for those things, Michelle, remember, is if you look at the Netherlands, where Dr. Jan van der Beek has done the most comprehensive study of the economic effects of immigration until now, what he finds, and this is where I start to worry about Britain, he finds that by relying on low-skilled, low-wage migration from outside of Europe, which is basically what we've pivoted to ever since the Brexit referendum. Remember, the Conservatives have flooded our economy with low-wage, low-skilled migrants who are often earning less than the average wage in this country. What that does is it takes more out of the economy than it puts in, which is why our GDP per capita, our productivity, if you like, is the worst since it's been since the 1970s. And Jan van der Beek estimates it's cost the Dutch about £80 billion. Now, he's a mainstream researcher. I am worried, Michelle, that the moment we start looking at this data, we're going to find that actually the British people have been paying billions of pounds for a extreme policy, and mass immigration is an extreme policy with no democratic consent that is costing them rather than contributing to their national community.
I mean, you say it's not got any democratic consent. I would argue it's the complete opposite. It's got a democratic mandate to have the complete opposite attached. That's what people vote for and absolutely don't get. Anyway, James, your thought?
Well, I think there's very little democratic mandate for most of the macro policies, the major policies that Britain has been living under for about 40 years. There's no democratic support for deindustrialisation. There's no democratic support for giving the bankers everything that they want. There's not democratic support for our role in illegal wars. And I think that part of what Matthew is getting at is downstream of a bigger problem, is an epiphenomenon of a bigger problem. We have huge problems of abuse in the labour market, of people being paid under the minimum wage, of people not being able to bargain up, people being fired and rehired. And the issue there isn't because that there has been low-skill migration. The issue is that trade unions have been under assault for 40 years and people aren't able to organise. There are huge problems in the housing sector, huge problems of poor quality housing, overcrowding, like disgusting slum landlordism, etc. And of course, this concentrates at the most vulnerable ends of society, which is often migrants. But that doesn't mean that they were causing it.
I don't think anybody is saying they're causing it, James. I think a lot of people in this country...
My point is it's downstream of where the fundamental problems are. So if we're talking about issues in the labour market, we should be looking at how the labour market has been deregulated to increase exploitation, and then how that is used by employers, including through hyper-exploitation of workers from elsewhere. We should look at housing, where we have a really terrible housing stock. We have an incredibly expensive private rented sector. We have the breaking up of flats into tiny rooms. And yes, a lot of that is rented at extremely exploitative rates.
James, do you understand why the housing market is in crisis? It's not just in crisis because of supply-side problems. It is in crisis because we have excessive demand. We built 180,000 homes last year in England and Wales to keep up with current levels of immigration. Do you know how many houses we need to build every year?
We haven't been building houses.
Do you know how many houses we need to build?
Please tell me we haven't been...
550,000 homes a year to keep up with migration. What you're presenting to people is it's either or. Either we have an economy with strong trade unions and regulations, right? Or you can listen to Matt and all of these concerns. What you could do is we could have a strong economy where workers have rights. But it could also be an economy where we have moderate, slow, lower levels of immigration, where our national culture and country is preserved and passed on to the next generation. What we've got instead is an extreme policy of mass immigration, which is undercutting the working class and serving big business.
Why do you and your allies then never argue for trade unions and against the bankers, for example? Why are you never saying, here are these fundamental problems, we wish to go for them?
I've said openly, I think the bankers who oversaw the financial crisis should have gone to jail. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with improving workers' rights. But I have a problem with people on the left justifying mass immigration just because it is immigration, without any rational argument.
Well, there'll be no bankers going to jail anytime soon because they're getting filled up with people that have tweeted things that other people don't like. Anyway, look, after the break, you won't want to miss this story, ladies and gents. If your boss asked you to put your pronouns at the end of your email, what would you write? My next guest, he had the audacity, everyone, to accurately describe himself. He got himself fired and landed with a bill of almost £13,000. What is going on? See you in 2.
Hello again and welcome along to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Staying fine for most of us during the next 24 hours, but it will be chilly overnight, and again we'll see some frost and fog form under this area of high pressure. The high this time contains clearer skies compared with last week's high pressure, which was predominantly gloomy. That means, of course, temperatures will fall away overnight quite quickly. So frost and fog pockets forming, especially across parts of Wales, the Midlands, Northern England, Northern Ireland. At either side of that, we're going to see cloud in the south and the far northwest, tending to keep things mild, and it will be a drizzly start to the day for northwest Scotland, and there'll be showers around first thing for parts of Kent as well. 1 or 2 showers running along the south coast. With the cloud in the south, a milder start to the day, but for Wales, the Midlands, Northern England, parts of Northern Ireland, some dense pockets of fog about. Likewise for central and southern Scotland. But further north into northwest Scotland, well, it's going to be a milder start to the day because of the cloud and those outbreaks of mostly light rain and drizzle. The light rain pushing into parts of Northern Ireland through the morning as well, and this area of cloud in the far northwest will tend to sink southwards slowly, and it will also turn cloudier through parts of Northern England, the Midlands and North Wales. Brighter skies to the south and southeast, a drier day to come for southeast England, and feeling pleasant enough, 11 to 12 Celsius. But into Thursday, we're going to see a cloudier start to the day. Still some pockets of fog about, not as much as previous mornings, however. And it's going to be a mainly cloudy day, I think, with some light showers affecting northwestern parts. Into Friday, a change is on the way, but it takes a good 24 to 36 hours to make its way across the country. That change to much colder weather through the weekend.
The latest GB News travel. Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. On the M62 in Cheshire, 2 lanes remain closed eastbound from junction 11 to 12 towards Manchester, just west of the M60. 2 lanes blocked off by collision, causing long queues. In Warwickshire on the M42, 2 lanes remain closed southbound from junction 9 to 8 towards the M6, following an accident. In Wiltshire at Devizes, the A360 is closed on Northgate Street. There was a fire that broke out in a building just off New Park Street this morning. Those investigation works are still taking place. On the M20 in Kent, the eastbound exit partly blocks junction 7, the Maidstone exit, where a car's broken down. Trains are suspended on the East Coast Main Line between Edinburgh, Waverley and Berwick upon Tweed because of a faulty train, and down on London Underground, the Piccadilly line can't run from Raiders Lane to Uxbridge because of the adverse weather. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Hello there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. If you're just joining us, alongside me, I've got Matt Goodwin, the pollster and academic, and James Schneider, the former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn. We've been having a lot of conversation about this data transparency. I will summarise that pretty much all of you have got in touch with me saying that, yes, you absolutely support the request and the need for the data transparency. But will Keir Starmer listen? That is the million-dollar question. And it seems right now, anyway, that the answer to that is no. But look, this story really caught my eye, not least, by the way, because it occurred on my home turf of Hull. Council worker Jim Orwin, get this, everybody, he has been taken, well, he took his case to an employment tribunal. He was asked by his boss to put his pronouns at the end of his work email, and he did. But I can tell you, no one liked the pronouns that he chose. He keeps me company now. Good evening to you, Jim. Thank you very much for joining us. Can you tell anyone that's not familiar with your story, tell us what's happened?
I joined East Riding Council in 2018 on a 1-year fixed-term contract. But that was subsequently extended 2 or 3 times. And then 4 years after I joined the council, we got an email circulated asking people if they wanted to put pronouns in email signatures. So with the email, there was a link to an external website called mypronouns.org. So I looked at the instructions on the email from the chief executive, and I read every page on the mypronouns.org website, and I realised it was an invitation to self-identify. So I self-identified, chose to self-identify as XY chromosome guy / adult human male. I knew it would be provocative, so I told my immediate manager what I intended to put. And then after that, I was subjected to, I was asked to remove them, which I refused to do. I was told it was a reasonable management instruction, but my concern was that it could only be reasonable if it was legal, and I felt it was discriminatory towards gender-critical people, so I refused to remove it. Subsequently, I was subject to a disciplinary hearing, and I was dismissed in August 2022. So I took the council to an employment tribunal to bring it up to date. That hearing was held in May this year, and I lost the case. And after that, the council submitted an application to recover their costs from me. Now, the normal circumstance in an employment tribunal is each party should bear their own legal expenses, but the judge agreed with the council and said that my case was vexatious. So, I mean, I think it can only be seen vexatious in as much as it was a gender-critical person taking the council to an employment tribunal.
So tell us, Jim, so you obviously feel very passionate about this issue. What is it? So when you got that request about your pronouns, what is it that then kicks in with you in your mind?
I just felt that the idea of self-identification, I mean, it's written on the tin, isn't it? So people should be able to self-identify in any way they like, which I disagree with. So I just thought, well, I'll self-identify any way I like, and we'll see what the council thinks to that. There was no restrictions on what I could put in my email until I put what I wanted to put. So in effect, it wasn't self-identification. So my problem is self-identification is a danger to vulnerable people. It's an encroachment on women's and girls' private spaces, and the council bears quite substantial safeguarding responsibilities for children and vulnerable adults. And as far as I know, There was no risk assessment done on this at all. So I don't think it should have been introduced at all.
So, I mean, this is a real point of principle for you. You found yourself in a situation now where you've lost your job, you're out of work, you've gone into early retirement as a result. You've got a 12,000, just over actually, legal bill that you've got to find from somewhere. You've got a GoFundMe account as well, haven't you? So if anyone is watching this that shares your passion for speaking out in this way, they can help support you, is that right?
That's right, yeah. GoFundMe, search for my name on GoFundMe and you should be able to get that. Or alternative, you can't get the link to GoFundMe on the GoFundMe site. I've got my own website, jamesorwin.com, and there's a link at the top of the first page on that. But one of the things I wanted to say, Michelle, was I was nearing the end of my career. So I'm 67 now, and I'm quite embarrassed to say I don't know what I would have done if I was 35 with a mortgage and a family to support. So I think it's crucial that this is highlighted.
Indeed.
People are scared stiff to do anything, I think.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, look, you demonstrate the consequence of standing by those principles. I'm very sorry, Jim, to hear your story. Thank you very much for getting in touch and sharing it, and we wish you all the very best with your life going forward.
Thank you, Michelle.
I've got to tell you, everyone, that East Riding of Yorkshire Council say that costs are a usual consideration in legal proceedings. They feel that essentially his reflection of his pronouns, I'm paraphrasing their statement a bit here, but what they're essentially saying is that they feel that that could have been profoundly offensive to people within the trans community. The reason that the council introduced their pronoun policy was to promote inclusion of people who identify their gender in a way that is not necessarily consistent with their biological sex. I'm going to tweet his GoFundMe page, by the way, because you're a pensioner and now you've got to stump up £12,000 for a point of principle that many people would agree with, and of course many other people would not. Where are you on this?
Well, I'll tell you where I am, Michelle. I'm going to finish this show and go find that GoFundMe, and I'm going to put 50 quid in it, and I hope everybody else does, because what Jim is doing is he's standing up against the new religion in our society, the new religion of radical gender ideology that is telling people that little boys can become little girls and little girls can become little boys. And they talk a lot about inclusion, but basically they want to include everybody except people who disagree with them. The gender pronouns signatures on emails are used to basically force people to align themselves with a political ideology in public institutions that should otherwise remain neutral and politically independent. Now, that's the most important part of what Jim said. Local councils have a duty, a safeguarding duty to look after children, vulnerable people, pensioners, etc. Why are they jamming radical gender ideology, which, by the way, even the Cass Review in this country recently concluded has insufficient scientific evidence and knowledge to support it? Why are they jamming it down people's throats?
And I've got to say, the council East Riding of Yorkshire, they would say that they didn't mandate it, they didn't force anyone to put their pronouns onto the email. It was a choice, if that was what you wanted to do. I want to just show you a clip, though, of Donald Trump, because many people that are watching this kind of issue, seeing how things are panning out, would be very interested in some of the statements that he, not that long ago, made. Take a listen to this.
No serious country should be telling its children that they were born with the wrong gender, a concept that was never heard of in all of human history. Nobody's ever heard of this, what's happening today. It was all when the radical left invented it just a few years ago. Under my leadership, this madness will end.
James Schneider, what do you think?
So I don't have the same principles as Jim in this, but I think this whole thing seems completely absurd. He shouldn't have been sacked for writing a thing on his email.
They will say that they sacked him because they asked him to take it off. They asked him, can you take this down because it'll offend people, and he said no.
Whatever. The whole thing is like is a waste of time. I mean, whatever is going on there shouldn't be going on. It's wasting the people who work there's time. It's the HR's time. It's him from doing whatever his job is. I think the thing is silly. Now, that all said, I don't agree with him on the principle. I think the safeguarding point is a non sequitur. I think what Trump just said is totally historically and anthropologically
How is it a non
inaccurate.
sequitur? If a local council is presiding over schools, toilets, women's rights?
I think the IT guy, whether he has he, him or nothing on his email signature is completely by the by.
You understand that's a symbol of an institution that is embracing radical gender ideology, which is why we have schools
I think that
have
is
been telling...
such a remarkable stretch to say that...
We have public institutions that have unisex toilets. We have women being forced to share spaces
GBNews has
with men and
unisex
boys.
toilets.
So you are fine with radical gender ideology being imposed on public institutions. You're fine with little boys being told that they can self-identify
So, firstly, the whole idea of radical gender ideology I don't accept. But more crucially...
So you believe that somebody's gender identity supersedes their biological sex?
One second. No, I think that gender and sex can be different. It's not a supersession type issue. Gender is something that we perform, and sex is something that we're born with, right? That's the facts of the matter. But I don't possibly see...
That's your fact.
I don't possibly see how an IT guy, whether he puts he, him, or whatever at the bottom of his email signature, is either here nor there. The whole thing seems to be a completely got-up nonsense. As I said, I don't think the guy should lose his job.
You're missing the point.
Michelle, sorry, can I just quickly come in here?
It's just a reflection of what's going on. This is not about whether or not an IT guy is this, that or the other. This is about whether or not institutions, particularly public ones, should be embracing this ideology that has proven to be, firstly, very contested and disputed. Secondly, based in no facts and reality. And thirdly, harmful, particularly to women and children.
Well, I'm sure that the second and the third points would be heavily contested by people who are knowledgeable about this.
You don't think gender ideology is harmful to women and children?
I don't think that so-called gender ideology...
Do you think... I mean, sorry, can I just ask a couple of questions
We're talking about the most trivial thing possible, and I accept the council should not.
When you're talking
the council should not have done this thing against him because
James,
of it.
It's not about
what
this
someone
case.
puts at the end of their email signature just could not matter less.
Right. First of all,
I don't care.
Fine, that's fine. That's your view. Why not let someone else have a view? When you're asking people, employees of public institutions, to express allegiance to a political ideology, that is not silly. That is a symbol of that institution embracing a contested political ideology. Secondly, the rights of women, the rights of our children, are not some silly culture war. This stuff matters. It matters for the protection of women. It matters for how we understand the importance of biological sex, how we protect children. It's not some silly culture war, which is how people on the left like you see it. This is what's really going on. What you guys have realised now with Donald Trump taking all levers of power in the US, what you've realised this week is the woke have lost. This is the beginning of the end.
I thought that was going to happen anyway, and Kamala Harris is not my side.
You guys have been advocating. Little boys can become little girls, and little girls can become little boys. All that stuff now is going to get rooted out of institutions across the West. And you guys haven't yet realised that the reason you've lost average voters, the reason you've lost the public is because you've been downplaying this stuff, saying, oh, this is a silly culture war, when actually, as we can see in America, people care a great deal about children and women's rights.
Remind me, you're a pollster, right? That's your profession. You're a polling guy.
One thing I do is polling.
So you're probably familiar with the polls from the election that they just had in the US,
sure,
and what issues were important.
Absolutely.
Where was the so-called radical gender ideology, or whatever you're talking about? Where did that come on the list of issues where people were voting?
If you look, for example,
was it high?
If you look, for example, at a study by Equi, which is a reliable pollster in the US, they looked at why Latino and Hispanic men, more than half of whom flipped to Donald Trump, they used to vote for the left. They used to vote for people like you.
Not the left. The left don't have a party in the US.
The Democrats, they used to vote for the Democrats.
The Democrats, yes, another corporate centre-right party.
And guess what? They flipped to Trump. Why? Because they've seen this stuff. They've seen this crazy radical left ideology, and they don't want it anymore. You guys have downplayed this. You've called it a culture war. You got it wrong. Denigrating Western history, denigrating the rights of children.
Western history.
Yeah, telling us all we're all racist and we're all prejudiced and and there's nothing to be proud about when it comes to Western nations. People don't think like that. You've been preaching to 10%, and now that's why Jeremy Corbyn's gone nowhere. That's why your movement's gone nowhere, because people looked at it and said, we're proud of our country. We want to believe in our country.
I'm afraid that's complete nonsense.
Well, I'll tell you who is going somewhere.
But it isn't, is it?
I'll tell
You know it.
No, I do know very much it's nonsense.
Why do you think Corbyn was so thoroughly rejected?
We are going to...
And what's Brexit about?
Can I just say
yes,
something?
it's about
respecting
toilets.
the nation.
It's about toilets.
It's about respecting
it's about
the
toilets.
nation.
It's probably about toilets.
It's about respecting the nation.
Excuse me, never mind respecting the nation. Respect me as your host when I'm telling you to shut up because we're going to a break. So there we go. We're going to a break. We'll see you back in 2.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
What do you think?
Morning. I think we have failed young drivers as a society, and we need to train them better and train them earlier. I think that the idea of stopping them carrying passengers for 6 months is a good idea because you've got peer pressure within a car. So yes, but I think graduated licenses are really difficult. You've got what we call the 3 E's, which is education, educating kids to drive earlier, and engineering, which is making roads better and safer, and then comes enforcement at the end of it. So I think we're failing in these 2 first ones, the education and the enforcement. I put my kids, all 3 of them, through a thing called Young Driver, which allows under 17s to drive on private land with ADI instructors and learn the craft of driving and all the below the dashboard stuff and hazard awareness long before they try and do this very compressed period of time to learn about driving. I think we're failing them. So I want to see it in schools, and I want to see them being taught much, much earlier.
Nobody's actually pointing the finger of blame, I think, at the young driver, but maybe young drivers don't understand how different it is. You feel you can drive, you've passed your test, and then a load of your friends get in the back, and suddenly the mood is different, the pressure on you as a driver is very different, showing off, just larking around and having a great time. Aisha, how do you feel about the fact that clearly young drivers do need to be protected almost from themselves, don't they?
Well, I do agree with some of what Quentin has just said, especially about starting early and especially about getting young people used to the dangers of being on the road.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe. Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, hello there. Michelle Dewberry back with you. Time flies. It's almost 7 o'clock. Look, Matt Goodwin and James Schneider remain alongside me. We were trying to thrash out there just how big of an issue this kind of gender situation is, because many people will roll their eyes and go, oh, why are you talking about trans? There's only a tiny, minute percentage of the population that are in that category. So why are you all banging on about it?
Well, because what people on the left tend to do is they say, well, this is all silly culture wars. But when you're talking about the rights of women, the rights of our children, how we think about our history and identity, these are actually the foundations of our civilization. The reason Trump did so well, for example, including among a majority of white women, and he did very well among Hispanic and Latino women, even though many people on the left would have you think this is just a kind of male movement, that's not the case at all, is because mums and dads worry a lot about how these radical, divisive, unscientific ideologies have now not just seeped into our institutions, but have taken over many of our institutions, from, let's say, legacy media through to universities. Trump has come out and said he's going to take back the universities, which have been completely hijacked by radical leftists. I've worked in universities for 20 years, believe me, I know. The whole diversity, equity and inclusion agenda is a political project dressed up as equality, except it is a highly political ideology designed to impose conformity in public institutions. And, you know, James and other Corbynistas and so on might say this stuff doesn't matter, but they know deep down, actually, that voters really care about these cultural questions. They care about their country and they care about their children.
Do you know that deep down, or do you accept that deep down or not?
No.
Oh.
So, Matt is interested... Matt, you're wonderfully eliding a whole number of things. So let's try to be concrete. You're interested in evidence, apparently. So,
well, you told me you didn't read the Cass review, which is the number one source of evidence on this.
The evidence of why people voted and switched their vote to Donald Trump in the US presidential election, issues to do with gender, ideology and identity and any of these things, didn't come in the top 6. I doubt they came in the top 15. This is not the reason why Trump won.
Many Americans, as you know, felt that Democrats were a threat to democracy because they stifled free speech and censorship on issues like this.
Which is a different issue.
No, it isn't.
And many Democrats...
What about Scotland? What happened in Scotland?
What about Scotland?
When the SNP tried to force everybody to sign up to gender self-identification, you know, 80% of the Scots looked at that and said, letting children self-identify without medical professionals is insane. Yet the SNP did it anyway, and then they lost power because people were like, this is crazy. So you say this stuff doesn't matter.
I don't think that's why... The SNP have been in power for 14 years,
The radical gender ideology was a big part of why the SNP started to come apart, and you know it was.
No.
The issue is when normal people look at this stuff...
None of the evidence suggests that. And the reason why you, Matt, and other people go on and on about it...
Yeah.
Is so that people are focused on this and not on...
Oh, right.
Yes.
Oh, is this a Marxist playbook? False consciousness.
No,
if we talk about this, they don't talk about the economy.
It's not false consciousness. It's quite clear. It's like there is a certain amount of airtime, let's say, for example, on television. There are a certain amount of column inches in newspapers, etc. Now,
I'd have more sympathy for that argument if people weren't jamming this stuff down people's throats. No one's jamming it down. Have you got kids?
No.
Right, well, let me tell you a story, because people who do have kids will know exactly what's going on. When their kids go to school or nursery, they will instantly encounter this radical gender ideology. They'll read the pronouns in the head teacher's emails. They'll be told by teachers, well, how do you identify? This stuff is everywhere. Mums and dads often aren't taught about it. The charities that advise governments, they've been like mermaids. They were shown to be sending breast binders to 13-year-olds without telling their mothers and fathers. And you sit here and say, this stuff doesn't matter. I actually care about what happens to our kids. I think it's really important. I think mums and dads out there want to know what's happening to their kids. You can't just brush this stuff under the carpet, James. It's real world. This stuff is actually happening.
Yes, I really care about what is happening to our kids, which is why I want them to be in properly funded schools. Why... What?
Yeah,
yes, you can... Matt,
it's not either or, James.
Matt,
it's not either or.
Well, you only go for, always, the issues that are meant to or serve to. Maybe they aren't meant to. Maybe you just are very unfortunate as a crusader for ordinary people. Just very unfortunately, they end up dividing people and preventing us from coming together and seeing who are the real problems.
So do we avoid all issues that might divide us?
No, of course we don't avoid all issues, but there are ways of talking about things which you can talk about in a perfectly sensible way, which doesn't demonise people, which doesn't turn people into great threats when they're not, which generally, it's almost always the same thing. It is the most vulnerable people with the smallest possible voice that you attack again and again and again.
Michelle, 10 seconds. This is what happens, like Lisa and Andy. The culture wars are over. Say the people who started the culture war on our children, our history and our nation.
Well, look, I just want to pipe in before the show finishes because I am an actual woman and I am a mother. And I completely disagree that this is a small issue, that this is a trans issue, it's a fringe issue or whatever. This is a matter of safety for women and for girls. And it never ceases to amaze me that it's normally men that dismiss how much of an issue this is. Us women and children deserve our right to single-sex spaces. And I will keep speaking up for that. But for now, look at that. I'm going to get the music playing because I'm out of time, everyone. Thanks, gents, for spirited debate. I appreciate it. Thanks to you at home. Faraj up next. Night.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome along to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Staying fine for most of us during the next 24 hours, but it will be chilly overnight and again we'll see some frost and fog form under this area of high pressure. The high this time contains clearer skies compared with last week's high pressure, which was predominantly gloomy. That means, of course, temperatures will fall away overnight quite quickly. So frost and fog pockets forming, especially across parts of Wales, the Midlands, Northern England, Northern Ireland. At either side of that, we're going to see cloud in the south and the far northwest, tending to keep things mild, and it will be a drizzly start to the day for northwest Scotland, and there'll be showers around first thing for parts of Kent as well, 1 or 2 showers running along the south coast. With the cloud in the south, a milder start to the day, but for Wales, the Midlands, Northern England, parts of Northern Ireland,